We are very pleased to have Co-Minister of Foreign Affairs, Valdrack Jaentschke, speak to us today about the period of neoliberal governments in Nicaragua. We will formally introduce him in a moment. We encourage you to study this topic further by joining the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition on Thursday evenings in September for our class on Governing from Below, Lessons from Nicaragua's Neoliberal Years. Each of the 4 Thursday sessions will cover 2 topics: unions and the student movement, the peasant movement and peasant feminism, the communal movement and Sandinista media, international solidarity, along with national reconciliation and unity. Each session will feature speakers who participated in struggles between 1990 and 2006, which helped the FSLN return to power in 2007. They will also share about the important role that Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo had in mobilizing people all over the country during those years, leading struggles against privatization of utilities, of education and health, and even bringing life-giving programs like Operation Miracle, the international eye surgery program that began in 2004 together with Cuba and Venezuela. There will be plenty of time for discussion, which we will explore how the lessons learned by the Nicaraguan people might apply to struggles for liberation in other countries. And now we turn to today's program. We warmly welcome Valdrack Jaentschke, Co-Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nicaragua. He will give us an overview of the extremely difficult neoliberal years and how the revolution survived. He is from Corn Island on the Caribbean coast, and he has held a number of government posts. Minister Valdrack Jaentschke, you have the floor.
Good evening. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever we are in this world. I think this is a new way of doing politics in the world. So we are very much connected throughout the world. I always joke and say to my comrades, would you imagine if during the struggle against the dictatorship in the 70s and 80s, if we had mobile telephones and WhatsApp, how the reality would have been fundamentally different. So thank you, Nan and the rest of comrades and colleagues. How much time do we have?
Sorry. You can take as much time as you want to take, leaving, say, 20, 25 minutes for questions. So, I mean, you could talk for a half an hour, you could talk for 40 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So this is an hour.
Actually, a little more.
Okay, perfect. I think the best part of it could be when we start asking questions. I am much more. I think that is where we can exchange information a bit more and to look at things. First, let me really express the greetings from our leadership, from Comandante Daniel Ortega and Comrade Rosario Murillo, who are always aware of what you're doing and what we are doing in the world to carry out the voice of the revolution. Therefore, I also need to thank you for the work that you're doing to inform, to clarify, and in a nutshell, to defend our revolution. which is ours, all of us, right? You have stayed firm, walking beside the Nicaraguan people and the peoples of different places. Although you have confronted systematic media campaigns to disqualify our popular revolution. Thanks to the Nicaraguan Solidarity Coalition and all of the organizations that are also part of this coalition. I think most of you that are in this webinar are pretty much knowledgeable of the history of Nicaragua. So I don't need to repeat it too much, but if we are going to talk about the neoliberal period, which is where we have circumscribed this conversation, I don't think it is. I think we need to also have an overview of the Nicaraguan history, because in order to understand, let me say, day before yesterday, because that's the neoliberal period, we need to understand where it's based. But I will try and rather than just a narrative of history, I would want to introduce an instrument of analysis or a tool to look at the history, which has been very useful to me in order to understand where and who stands in all of the historical moments of the country. So the first thing is, I utilize a lot this two categories. I don't know if you want to call it like that. For me, the history of Nicaragua is fundamentally a constant struggle between the oligarchic forces and they're in alliance with the foreign intervention and the popular movement. You know, it's as simple as that. Where you stand, when you look at the history and where you stand in front of each one of these, or where you stand with regard to each one of these two great categories, which is, for me, the oligarchic and all of what it means, and the popular movement will allow you to understand where the political forces are standing today. And it helps us enormously to understand what happened in that period of between 1990, of that 16 years of the neoliberal regression or counter-revolutionary period. So our history is clearly divided, I said, between where you are with respect to the popular movement and where we are with respect to the oligarchic thinking. Oligarchy thought as in terms of an ideology that conceives itself with almost a divine right, destined to the belief that they are inherently worthy of privilege. You know, we in English, we use the word entitlement. And I think that entitlement, so that will help you understand then where each one of the political forces stand in front of each one of the moments of history. The other one is, as I said, the popular movement, where we can then see all of the struggles against colonialism, for independence, for defense of sovereignty and self-determination. So if you are able to look then at the actors, the political actors from the colonial period, from the neo-colonial period, and then the U.S. intervention of 1854, the famous William Walker period, then you can see that the popular movement really was not conducting. They are leading, I would say, the confrontation. It was led by parts of the inter-oligarchic fight. We must remember that William Walker was brought to Byron Cole, and all those people were brought to Nicaragua by the Democrats, the liberals, not the conservatives. But then once they were here, liberals and conservatives allied to support William Walker at the beginning, and then found a way then to reorganize and fight. I think Benjamin Celedón in 1912 is a much more clear expression of the popular movement. It's a much more expression of that sense of dignity. It's true we have Andrés Castro and we have all of these very heroic moments in the war against William Walker, but again, I think it was the oligarchy. Well, the oligarchy was sort of in a way managing that or conducting it, but with Celedón, with Benjamin Celedón and Sandino. Sandino is the first time, it's my argument, that the popular movement had the leadership of the confrontation against the imperialist intervention. That's the profound difference between Sandino and before rescuing Benjamin Celedón. Up until Sandino, most of the confrontation with foreign agents, with foreign intervention, with the intervention of the US or Europe in those moments, were conducted or directed or led in some way by factions of the oligarchy. But Sandino marks the profound difference in that. Sandino is the first time that someone who comes from the popular sector, that someone that comes from the ideology, an ideology that is enrooted in the popular movement, leads the confrontation and the defeat of the American intervention in that period. So Sandino marks a profound difference, not only for Nicaragua, but for the entire region, where if you look at the history, all of those anti-colonial or even anti-intervention were led by sectors of the oligarchy. This is my discussion. This is how I am able to understand this. And Sandino marks that difference. I think that is the essence that that marks the difference in Sandino, then in the Sandinista front, and our popular revolution. No, I think, well, you have an element of similarity with Cuba and Martí and Maceo and those popular leaders that conducted the struggle up to Fidel in Cuba. So you can see that when the forces of change and when the forces of the revolution are in the hands of what I call the popular movement, then you can say that the revolution is profoundly popular, and it had an element that does not negotiate, that does not cannot be bought, and it has a more long-lasting, enrooted essence, the revolution with the people. So if throughout our history, then the emergence of the Sandinista Front in 1961, which is more or less the date, give and take, that we define, with Carlos Fonseca at the head, and Comandante Borges, that you can really see that they are not elements of the oligarchy in the conduction of the Sandinista Front. Now, there were a lot of anti-dictatorship forces before the Sandinista Front for National Liberation, Olama and Mollejones, all of these, either conservative, radicalized, whatever, but all of them, for me, had a component of the oligarchy in it. The difference with the Sandinista Front that makes the connection with Sandino is that both Sandino and the Sandinista Front are, how Sandino would say, surjo del seno de los oprimidos. No, I come from the oppressed. And it's important for me to make this difference, because then we will see how that your position in front of your position ideologically in favor of the oligarchic position, or your position in favor of the popular movement will then define what happened at the beginning of the neoliberal period, and how then the Sandinista Front was able to confront it. As I said, the other important moment in our history, in our political history, Sandinista history, is the historical program of the Sandinista Front. I think it's at the end of the 60s, and that document, which for me is one of the most profoundly revolutionary manifestos, because it takes a very broad look at the history, at our history, but a very profound position in favor of the defense of sovereignty. It doesn't only reaches to we need to overthrow the dictatorship. I'm talking 1969, right? We and revolution, as our leaders would say, those who were in the struggle in that moment did not believe. I think Daniel said that in an interview. They did not believe that they would see the triumph, because it was a commitment to struggle, not a necessary commitment that we're going to see victory. But that document of 1969, the historical program, is a very broad look at Nicaraguan problems and history, actors, and very profoundly enrooted in the vision of the popular movement, and not that vision of the oligarchic. So that dichotomy between the popular movement and the oligarchy, I think, is the dialectic force that moves our history, and that can explain a lot what happened then in the history. And I think the period, the 16 years period, which we'll talk a little bit about, is very important to then set the base for what happened after 2007. And I think it opened then a analytical period that is what we're living today, and why we are living it today in the way we are living it today. So the first thing that happened at the end of 1990s, if we can remember how the 1990s was set up. First, we triumphed, the revolution triumphed militarily, and started to transform the society in such a swift and deep way. I mean, the first thing we did was the literacy campaign. I mean, so what more revolutionary than a literacy campaign. 52 today, as a matter of fact, today is the day that the literacy campaign was officially closed, and the numbers were talked. Today is 23rd of August, right? Is the day of alphabetization, as we would say in a Spanishized way, a literacy day, right? Very, 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 very interesting choice of date, Nan. So, but that I think is one of the most profound revolutionary actions. But it showed you where the revolution had its guide, and then it was telling you we are not here to have I'm use a Creole phrase here, simmy-dimmy, kind of halfway thing. We are going to have a profound revolution, and that I think shows you how, as I said it before, how swift and deep we were carrying out the transformations. Health, education, rights, but we had to face the terrible military intervention waged against us by imperialism in those days. That two things, you know, I used to say the defense of the revolution is the most important thing, but parallel to the defense of the revolution, 50,000 people died in a country of, I think then more or less 3 million, up to 3 million and a half, 50,000 people dying in this confrontation is an enormous toll, is an enormous price to pay just to carry out the precepts of the revolution. And I would say again, we need to look back at the historical program of the front to see that is the charter, that is our guide to what we were doing in the 1980s. And so the very profound transformation in terms of rights, of participation, of government effectivity, government delivery, you know, but the response of the popular movement, the response of the people, the response of the Frente Sandinista in the 1980s show you how strong we were able to then not only face and struggle, but also defeat that form of intervention. Again, I have to say Nicaragua is a country that when we became independent, of course, those of us from the Sandinista movement, we think that our independence is until 1979, politically looking at it, but the formal independence from the colonial force of Spain in 1821, immediately after that, we were faced with a very, very harsh foreign intervention that led up to what we call the National War. But the period between 1820 and 1854 to 56 is a period also of enormous struggle. We were immediately faced with having to struggle against foreign intervention, and then came, you know, that period of the Celaya liberal revolution that takes us to Benjamin León, which is another form of intervention, another moment of intervention, then takes us to Sandino, another response of the Nicaraguan people to foreign intervention, then takes us to the struggle of Sandinista Front. Remember that the Sandinista Front for National Liberation had to face not only the Nicaraguan National Guard, or the Somoza Guard, but it was a coalition of all of the dictatorship of Central America fighting against the Sandinista Front. Let's not lose that perspective. There was a very, all of us hear about the program Aguila Sexta and all of those programs that every one of the little dictatorships in Central America came together to defeat the Sandinista Front for National. Yeah, of course, the popular movement in El Salvador and in Guatemala mostly were also a collective response of the right wing funded and financed by the U.S. in that moment, and the companies, the U.S. companies in the region. We cannot forget Jacobo Arbenz. We cannot forget the FMLN struggle. We cannot forget the guerrilla in Guatemala in its different forms. So I said, we have known foreign intervention, but what came at the end of the 80s and the 90s, and look at it. Now, do not forget that historical moment of the elections of 1990, which we lost, and its parallelism with today. I'll just leave it there hanging for a second, no, so that we can remember what happened. So, 10 years of destruction, 10 years of death, 10 years of every time we tried to build something came military action. Do not forget, because this sets the 16 years and it sets today, that our the country was practically completely boycotted. Our ports were mined, and they were waging a war against the revolution. So those things are not necessarily, they are in conjunction, they are not separate. But the Contra-war plus the diplomatic push in those days against the revolution, I mean, so we are looking at it on a 2.0 today, right? The diplomatic push against the Nicaraguan revolution, the mining of the ports, and the economic blockade that we faced in the 80s were all part and pieces of a same action to destroy the revolution, to destroy the Nicaraguan effort to not only deliver and improve the quality of life of people. That is what you can see in the materiality, but the profound ideological transformation around rights. I mean, say, the rights of women, for example, we look at it as a given today. The strong position that women take in politics today, the position that Nicaragua has today around the rights of women to participate, to lead, and to conduct any one of the efforts. That strength, that inner strength that women have today is enrooted in the struggle and in that explosion of rights and struggle for rights in the 80s. I don't like to do this too much, but indigenous and Afro-descendant rights, again, I talk about the historical program of 1969, where all of these elements are charted and then began to be implemented in the 80s, confronted by the war, confronted by the diplomatic effort of the right wing then, and confronted, but we had, probably the world was much different in those days, where we could find much more solidarity and much more at the government level and at the non-government level to defend the revolution. But, well, we don't want to get into that. But what I'm trying to say is that the conversation about what happened in the 90s is enrooted in this history. And the 90s response of the Sandinista Front is the base to understand 2007 when we came back to government and to understand why we're doing what we're doing today. I don't know how much minutes I have left, but let me run quickly. So
you're good. Hey, take however much you want.
What happened in 1990? I remember that in 1990, not only we were being attacked militarily, I said, but we went to that election of 1990 with a gun put to our heads. I would never forget La Prensa's 8 columns on the day of election says, Bush dice que continuará financiando a la contra, some kind of way of that, no? Si ganan los Sandinistas. If the Sandinista wins, the U.S. government is going to continue financing the contra. I mean, that's the Sunday morning of the election. That was the 8 columns of the Prensa. If you vote for the Sandinista, we will continue waging war on you. Who in this earth can not be affected by such a threat by the most powerful country in the world in that movement? I mean, say, who? The popular movement. The popular movement. Those Nicaraguan that, in spite of all of the destruction, in spite of all of the difficulties, in spite of all of the economic striving, were able to go to the polls and vote. 45% of the Nicaraguans, more or less, voted for the Sandinista front. So I mean, that shows you something, but it gives you a hope. But it also shows you that you have to be, the popular movement need to be aware and ready to defend the transformation that we are carrying out. We lost elections, came then that horrible period of counter reform, if you want to call it, from the social sciences perspective, or counter revolution, and we immediately began to see how overnight our peasants began to lose the land that was given to them by I don't use the word given, and I apologize, but the land that they owned rightfully up to that moment. The first thing they attacked were health and education. It's impressive. The revolution brought down illiteracy from 55% before the revolution to 10 to 12%. And we were working towards formally zero illiteracy. And in the 16 years, it went right back up to 46, I think, percent, 40%, something like that. Terrible in 16 years. But the first thing the attack were people began to take away the land, began to take away the triumph, those elements like health, like education, from people. But why? What did we do? And I think there we find an enormous difference. The Sandinista front, everybody here knows, that went through a process of discussion, right? Everybody knows that. Part of the Sandinista then went against the core of the Sandinista front and divided. A new party emerged, and there is where you can see the difference. It doesn't matter if you come from a rich country, a rich family, or you don't come from a rich family. Your position facing intervention is what's going to define whether you are on the side of the oligarchic proposal or you're on the side of the popular movement. And that is what I think makes it different. Daniel Ortega took to the streets, took to the municipalities, to the neighborhoods. He worked systematically, visited practically the entire country, carrying the words of the Sandinista hope for a future. We say hope is a big element of that. So while our people were being attacked, and I always categorize that period as another form of foreign intervention. If you want to put like all of the list of foreign intervention, those 16 years were one of the worst period of foreign intervention because it was hidden, it was destroying the elements of existence of people. The number of people who died, I think there are some kind of numbers of about how many people are, you could say, died because the hospitals stopped attending people. I have a data here. It says that medicines, for example, at the end of the revolution, we were spending $45 million in medicine, and by 2005, that went down to $12 million. That shows you easily where the priorities of the oligarchic forces were. But again, let's go to the teachings of this. The first thing was organization. We had to organize, and Commander Daniel, as I said, went to every neighborhood in the rural areas, in the cities, started visiting because we had to fight to survive first, and we had to fight against that terrible neoliberal proposal of privatization. Everything began to be privatized, and I mean, that was accompanied by in the world that was happening in the entire world, and there was this push to privatization. But in this country, where there was such small, the public sector was unable to satisfy all the needs of people, that privatization was practically very, very criminal. No, again, we were able to organize. I mean, we went to elections in 1995. We went to election again in 2001. We went to elections in 2007. Those 3 elections, and people were dying, literally dying from the neoliberal proposal. But we organized, and that is the only thing. 2 things are fundamental here. The first thing is to keep loyal to your positions. There is no negotiation when it comes to the rights of people, the responsibility of the state, and the capacity of people to organize. That ability to understand clearly in each one of these stages where the enemy lies, what are the things we need to do, and organize around it, allow us to maintain that capacity to confront this neoliberal period. So the synthesis, comrades, is organization and clarity of the mission. If you answer, what is that? Organization and clarity. It sounds easy, but it's what? Going to keep stubbornly loyal to your principles. And that takes us to 2007. We were able to come back to the government in 2007. And we can see where those who ally with the foreign intervention are the same ones who began immediately in January of 2007 to attack the revolution. Those are the same ones. Those are the children of Maximo Jerez. This is the one that signed the agreement with the Americans in 1850 something, 53, around there. Those are the children of the oligarchic thinking. We then, from 2007, I'm not going to relitigate that because I imagine you all have spoken a lot, but I think when it comes to where we are today, it's important to then take those examples throughout our history and see where the loyalty towards the popular movement lies today, where the loyalty to around people lie, and where we need to understand that we are going to do anything necessary to defend this popular revolution. We are looking at the same kind of diplomatic push from the right wing allied with the foreign intervention forces. We are looking at the same economic aggression against the country, and we are not going to stand looking at it, let it pass without organizing our people. So we go back. If you look at this consultation of the reform of the Constitution, it is nothing more than organizing, going back to the communities, consulting the communities, mobilizing the communities around what? Around our principles, around our transformation, around our advances of the revolution, around those things that we're building that improves the quality of life of people, create a space for stability and I don't know if I can use the word tranquility, I'm Spanishizing this, and peace. Work, peace, stability, improvement of quality of life. That is our responsibility as a political force. That is the responsibility of the revolution, and that is the commitment that we have. So we are then are going to protect this process, and I mean, a lot of us are going to fall into the thinking that the right wing, the foreign intervention, imperialist forces are democratic and that they are looking out for a democratic process. It doesn't exist. This is a struggle between those who feel like they are entitled to power, and are entitled to riches or whatever, and those of us who believe that it is the people. And I love the way Commander Daniel said the 19th of July, the people who are president who dictate their future. So I don't know, I try to make a continuum of the history to understand what happened in the 90s. And the 90s up to 2006, the only response was organization and clarity. It's the same thing today. Capacity of organizing and clarity of the mission. The mission is to defend the revolution, and the organization is to mobilize the people in defense of that revolution. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to have you. And now we're going to organize some questions for you. Everyone, remember, go to the circle at the bottom where it says more. And in that, you'll see Q&A, and you'll be able to ask a question. Do not put your questions in the chat because we will not see them. Petra, are you with me?
Yes, I'm with you.
Okay. You have the questions up?
Give me 1 second.
And while he's working on that, just please keep, I know you have many questions, please keep putting them in the Q&A. Sometimes the Q&A simply appears at the very bottom of your screen, and other times you have to go to the circle that says more. Well, I'll go ahead and ask the first question. Foreign Minister, because of what you just said, I was already thinking about this, about these groups of people who, because of their background, they think they are entitled to run the country. And one of those families are the Chamorros. And I have a question here from Mike James that says, I'm curious about the Chamorros. Can you speak about their historical role and into modern times?
It's an interesting family. When after the independence from colonization, a number of families stayed. They are not from the oldest families. They're really much. But they have played, their family and that family in particular had played a role. Actually, what they did is they intermarried with the Criollos, which is the descendants of the Spaniards. But their political position, their role throughout the conservative period was very important. And their role in aligning themselves with foreign intervention throughout our history is clear. If it's one family that is able, but I don't want to circumscribe it to a family because it's not a family phenomenon, it's a class phenomenon, no? And you hear me struggling because there are a number of things that come into my mind around where Sandino comes from. You know, Sandino comes from the plateau of the plateau here in Masaya. He comes from Nikinomo, which are very small farmers. No, Sandino comes from there, so you have a different perspective towards history. And the Chamorros are the oligarchic sector come from the large landowners, latifundio, no, in Spanish. So it's not just the Chamorro, but yes, maybe you can say, and they were able. This is where I'm struggling because the Somoza dictatorship actually hit a lot of those large farm owners at the beginning of it, no? By no way I am defending the dictatorship with what I'm saying, but they were hitting that sector. And that, because I think what you want to understand is how they came into sectors of the revolution in the 1980s, and that radicalized a number of their children. So you had them in all the, but there are people that say, no, they had vested interest in the different parts of the political spectrum in Nicaragua. But I think they are a clear expression along with their entire oligarchic class. And this I'm going to say very clear. I don't care if you had a guerrilla commander's uniform in the 80s. Your position in front of with respect to foreign intervention is what defines your position. I don't care how much heroic actions you may have done, because there is a very radicalized sector of the oligarchy that supported the revolution at some point, right? And came into it. So I don't care how much. Is their position in the 90s that defined their historical class position. No, there was a popular uprising. We defeated the National Guard, whatever at the end of the 70s, at the beginning of the 80s. A number of these radicalized against the dictatorship, but not against foreign intervention. You see where I'm going with that? They were radicalized with respect to the dictatorship because the dictatorship had affected their parents. But they were not structurally, fundamentally, ideologically against foreign intervention. And foreign intervention is the cross-cutting phenomenon in our country. Where you stand before foreign intervention defines where you are, on the side of the oligarchic movement, or on the side, the oligarchic sector, or on the side of the popular movement. And I think that's more or less is, and that is the force that tried to pervert the Sandinista front in the context of us losing the elections. We did not lose the revolution. We lost the elections. Very interesting difference, no? The revolution kept alive with those like Commander Daniel, who directed the Sandinista front in the new period. And that's why, for me, it's fundamental to recognize that leadership of Daniel and Rosario and all of the comrades in the Sandinista front in that period. It was a very dark and lonesome period, if you recall. You have been in this country enough to when I think about that period, the only thing I think is darkness. Darkness with looking at a bunch of these people who let me figuratively say, wore the uniform, and they were ready to throw it away in order to seek forgiveness, I don't know, or to seek an alliance with the foreign intervention. So they are the children of Máximo Jerez, and I say Máximo Jerez because that's the one that signed the agreement with William Walker and Byron Cole and all those people back in 1853. There is a line, and that's what I wanted to stress today. There is a line that takes us from that period in our history to today, and those are the same ones. That class is I think one of the most dangerous enemies that we have, because they are able to fake themselves into trying to find the favor of people. But the element that again will characterize them is that they are treacherous, they betray principles, and they're capable to align with those who want from outside to come and destroy this revolution. I don't know.
Good explanation. Petros, are you ready to jump in with the next question? From Eduardo Ceballos?
Yep. Give me 1 second. From Eduardo Zevallos. How was the society different after those 16 years? What problems did the Sandinistas inherit from the neoliberal era?
I'll be a little bit. The neoliberal period, other than the hardship, are added to the hardship that the day-to-day hardship of people, the day-to-day difficulties. Remember, we didn't have electricity blackouts. We had turn-ons. No, they would come, light would come now and then, right? But those are hardships. Those are, people were living, the supermarkets may have been full, but people couldn't go to them, Added to that, I think that one of the most important things that the neoliberal period did was to corrupt the political spectrum. No? Everything was transactional. Everything was, you could buy yourself through. And that permeated the entire political system. And we had to, like Sandinistas, we had to struggle against that. And we had to work strongly from the ideological perspective not to allow that to take over the movement or take over when we came to the government after 2007. I think one of the elements that is much characteristic of our government since 2007 is I mean, people will talk about corruption, but there isn't elements of institutionalized corruption in our government. I mean, that is said by the banks, that is said by the financiers of development, that is said, that is not an element that happens here. The fact that we have been able to confront and eliminate drug trafficking and the delincuencia transnational delinquency successfully speaks about the core principle around fighting against corruption, being transparent, and being truthful to that Sandinista element of not getting corrupted in that sense, in that way. I say that because, yes, there was enormous hardship. There was, people couldn't buy food, people didn't have health. It was terrible. There was no work, there was no jobs, there was no peace. But from the Sandinista perspective, we faced and were successful in facing that the corruption, the structural corruption that the neoliberal proposal meant for the society did not permeate either our movement or our exercise in government. I mean, and Comandante Daniel Rosario has been adamant and unwavering around that element. Those of us in this cabinet, we know that, we understand that, and we know that there is a consequence for anything in that. So I went in a different place. Yes, I can sit here and describe the list of difficulties and hardship that we had to face, that our people had to face, that we had to overcome once we come to government. I mean, said two things that Commander Daniel did as soon as we came to government in 2007 is free education, free health. We had 30 more or less, 30 important health centers or hospitals in the country. Today, that is up to looking for 90, over 80. I mean, it's not only decreeing that education and health is free. It's building the institutions, the infrastructure, and the facilitation for people to go to school that makes it relevant. It's not only decreeing, it's not decreeing that health is free. It's having the most advanced technological infrastructure in the country is not in the private health system. It's in the public health system. It's the public health system that has the cutting edge technology that we are having in the country to face cancer, to face different. It's not only decreeing, but it's also doing. But come back, that's why I'm saying, the hardship and what we have done. But I think the ideological, I think one of the problems in the neoliberal period was that dismantling of the role of the state in leading and delivering. And the same way they were privatizing companies, they were privatizing our denationalizing, not deregulation either, the role of the state and turning it over to a number of non-governmental organizations. I don't have a problem with non-governmental organizations, but we have to be clear when you are responsible in leading the state that it is the prime responsibility of the state to organize society and ensure that everybody gets equal access to things. And that role cannot be substituted by anyone else in the society but the state. That's my belief. No? And I think that is our element. That's it. So you had this enormous burst of organizations that were trying to deliver things to people, are trying to deliver services to people because the state didn't have the responsibility. When that, okay, let's go back. The state became irrelevant for people's lives in the 1990s, right? It did not guarantee the right of people to access to services and for people in the 1990s. And then what happened is they started transferring that responsibility to organizations because there were people who were genuinely committed to helping communities and to helping people, but it is not their primary responsibility, it is of the state. So once the state came out of the equation, other organizations had to obligatorily, in many cases, step in and solve these problems or help people solve their problems. The problem comes when people start believing that that is the way to solve it. For us, the way to solving is taking the government and making the government powerful enough to solve people's problems. And that dismantling of the state in people's minds and that giving the state a pass in people's mind, I think was one of the main problems that we had to face, because then we had to rebuild the thinking that it is the state responsibility to solve things. And then that also went into a number of ways of corruption. Corruption is not only stealing, there is different ways of corruption. So I think one of the things that we were able to solve is that open, vulgar corruption that happened in the 90s and the political people who were in charge of the government and parties in the 1990s. You remember the liberals, everybody remember Arnoldo Alemán, everybody remember dissent. That institutionalized way of corruption in the state can become a terrible problem if you ideologically begin to give it a pass. And if it's one thing that I think we have been successful in that transferring from the 90s to the 2007s to now, is we did not allow that. And just look at our success, as I said, drug trafficking. We don't have, the problems that our neighbors are having because of the monies that coming from drug dealing. We don't have those kind of problems in this country. And of course, we have very strong security institution. But the biggest security institution that we have is the people of Nicaragua, because we have been able to build an ideological defense. People do not allow it to happen. I don't know. That was a long-winded answer to a very simple question, but anyways.
Very good. This question is from Catherine Hoyt. How did the strict neoliberal policies of the IMF and the World Bank, hold on, something happened to the question, it moved. Shoot, it like ended. Kathy, you're gonna have to put your question in again.
I can find it.
Yeah?
Yes. From Catherine Hoyt.
That's right.
How did the strict neoliberal policies of the IMF and World Bank impact FSLN organizing? And how was the FSLN, back in power in 2007, able to successfully challenge those policies?
Jimmy smiling because it's a very, very interesting question that characterizes a lot of things. Okay, so of course, if the economic policies of the 90s, which was in favor of deregulation and dismantling of the state and privatization happened, that forced the government in that moment, I give them a pass with that force, although they were ideologically in sync, to then begin, the first thing that they do is take away rights from people in order to respond to the demands of the IMF. And remember, Nicaragua was then a pilot country because we had, we were a pilot for highly indebted poor country. HIPC, I think, is the acronym for that. HIPIC, we would say, you know, somos país HIPIC, HIPC, which is highly indebted poor country. Practically, somebody said once that companies can go bankrupt, but countries can't declare themselves bankrupt. And the way of doing that is having an agreement with the Monetary Fund and the World Bank. So yes, it allowed us then to organize in a way to show people that their lives was being impacted. No, I hear a lot today about affordability when you look at the television, but it was the structural adjustments they used to call it. Remember, I don't know, from the structural adjustment, which meant firing a lot of people, closing Social Security, taking off an enormous amount of people that had pensions because of their family that died in the war, or because the minimum pension, because, you know, someone who worked and didn't have enough time working, then they would have what they call the minimum pension. But the first one that they struck from the list was the children of heroes and martyrs, who were then immediately taken off from the INS. In those days, it was INSB. It had bienestar included with the Instituto Nicaragüense de Seguridad Social y Bienestar. But so once the privatization began, people began to lose rights, let's call it rights and access. And then came the shrinking of the state, they called it, no? And through that structural adjustment that they did, then they started paying people, I think it was 2 or 3 months severance pay to leave the state, with the commitment that you could not be hired again by the state. No? There was a piece of paper that said, okay, yes, I'll take the severance pay, whatever, because, well, I have to eat tomorrow, faced between firing and that. But then you signed a paper that said you could not work for the state again. No? So it was sort of a terrible. So yes, I mean, so that is politics 101, in the sense that it allows us to organize people around that. But the whole the ability to rebuild the concept of hope in people was very difficult in those post-war periods. So people could be suffering, but the scaring that if we came back to government, it meant we go back to war. Remember, that was the sword that was the hatchet that was swung on top of everyone's heads, is that if you vote the Sandinistas back into power, immediately we go back to war and the military service and whatever. So that was the boogeyman or woman, I don't know, in those cases that the people were facing. So we had to be very, very careful in how we organize and how we carried out our message. Remember, we came to government in 2007 under the precept of Government for National Reconciliation, because then we found that reconciliation was a very powerful hope-carrying concept. No? We needed to build hope into people again, build our message in a way that they could see that there was hope and there was future with our government. It's not just saying it will give you more money, I will give you more things. It's not about things, it's about people believing. And the concept of national reconciliation became a very powerful message to rebuild the hope in people. And that is how we came to government in 2007, in a very, 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 very thin margin. And do not forget that the Sandinista proposal, let me call it that way, to saying that it encompasses an enormous, more than what would be the militants or the historical fighters or whatever, but the Sandinista concept, the Sandinista proposal is one that generates a very broad alliance of the right wing and of the interventionist forces from the north. I mean, their proposal, don't forget that their proposal is to destroy the Sandinista. Not only physically destroy the Sandinista proposal. You have to destroy the proposal, they have to destroy the hope, they have to destroy that in order to maintain that that sense of that exclusionist position or sense that you have spoken earlier of, the entitlement of. So, yes, the structural adjustment were, you would say it would look like it would be easy to organize around. Nope. It's very difficult to organize people around when you are not able to transfer the concept of hope. And once we were able to find that, I think for the 2001 election, we were moving very closely to that. But then came 9/11 and the whole world went into a different position. And in that context, I think people said, no, we will not take a gamble with you, because and we will see what will happen. So between 2001 and 2007, we went back to rebuilding that reconciliation of everybody to build the proposal of 2007. But your question was, I think, more about, yes, there was a structural adjustment in the 1990s, and the IMF and the highly indebted poor country and the debt and all of those things. And what we did after 2007, because those were instruments that was here. The difference is leadership in state. I think the difference is when you sit in front of these people that are coming with their proposal or their vision to organize the state, and you say, nope, we are going to do this and yes, we are going to have free education, and we are going to have free health, and we are going to maintain the cost of the bus transportation in $2.50, which is what, roughly 10 cents dollar, and we have kept that throughout the time. And there is one economic indicator or element that goes directly to cost and to people's life, which is transportation. When you maintain that transportation solo. And so I think, yes, we maintain because our relationship with IMF, at the beginning, we still had an agreement with the IMF, and we were within the constraint that would give us. I think those negotiations were very successful because, how you say in Spanish, hay alcalde en el pueblo, there is a mayor in town, there is a leadership in town. We would sit in front of those guys and say, nope, we're not going to take this, we will take this, we'll not take this. And once you have a a united front. And we learned that very early. We learned that whole discussion about cooperation and the countries and they're coming to dictate what they're going to say. We said, nope, we are going to maintain our position. And this is our alternative. No? We have been very careful, some people say orthodox, very careful in how we handle the macroeconomy. I mean, we have been enormously careful because we are able to balance delivery and fiscal responsibility. If one from an economist here sitting here, and I am not one, would tell you that the success of our economic model is based on our ability to balance the delivery and the need to the needs of people with fiscal responsibility. We are able to do that. And we were able to prove to those Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, the Inter-American, the IADB, and all of those who are one big family of interventionists, that when you sit with us, we have our national development plan, we have our clarity, we have our priorities, and we are going to do things how we do it. And we either sit and do it, or we will take the responsibility. But on the side of that, we were beginning to get very positive response from those same institutions, because we were very firm in not allowing them to dismantle our economic model. And we were getting positive responses, which in turn worked very good to the sense of stability. Because don't forget that we come from the 1990s devaluation, horrible devaluation period in the 1990s. And the two things that people were afraid of with us were military service and that we were going to destroy the economy by going back to the Cordova costing, 50,000 Cordovas for $1. I don't remember how much it was. I know we had to get our salaries in wheelbarrows. There was so much money in those times. So what we did in 2007 at the beginning is, number one, we were very effective implementers of projects. I mean, so we built things. We did what we said we were going to do. The money did not get lost. The money did not find other places to go. I look at the neoliberal period and say, these guys had everything from the economic perspective in their hands, and they were unable to do things. And we were the fuck. I mean, remember in 2007, in 2008, the European Union began their sanctioning and totally took away all of the resources that there was investing in the country. 2008, after the elections of 2008, they sent us a little piece of paper saying, nope, we're not going to continue funding anything in Nicaragua. And we worked it around different other models to mobilize those resources. But what we did not give up is that we were driving the bus. I think that's the difference. There is a driver in this process, and the driver is the Nicaraguan government, and the driver is the Nicaraguan government under the leadership of the Sandinista Front with the priorities of the Sandinista Front. So yes, I smile because I know people would say, yeah, but you still had an agreement with the IMF. Yes, we had an agreement. Yeah, what we did with the IMF agreement is it worked. What happened with the IMF agreement is that it worked in favor of the stability of the economy, because if we had a good, and the IMF was saying that our economy was doing good, and we were growing, and the World Bank was saying that we were growing positively, that went very far in dismantling the fear of our society and of economic actors, and that took us. And that is why 2008, this is such a betrayal of the right-wing forces and the entitled who even in confronted with all of that success between 2007 and 2018, felt that they had to destroy the Sandinista government and went against everything, every economic concept, every cost-benefit analysis, went and shoot themselves in the foot. And their bet was that we were going to be unable to rebuild it. And look at where we are today, growing faster, growing with much more structural stability. We are exporting more than what we ever exported, not only in terms of price, but in terms of the size of the goods that we are exporting. Foreign direct investment is still an important and fundamental part of ours. Yes, we have, and we can open the discussion next time about the market economy and that, but it is not the market, it is who conducts the process. And I think that's the element that you have to do. At the beginning in 2007, we sat and said, these are our priorities, we are not going to go against them. And today is, yes, we're going to have this open market economy, but there is a fundamental economic factor, which is stability. And the only one that can give that is a strong government and a strong political, in this case, proposal, party, however you want to call it.
Thank you, Minister. We have about 20 million questions left for you, just so you know. And we're supposed to end in 5 minutes. My question is, would you be willing to go just 10 more minutes to 2:40? Or are the people you work with, which would mean a total of 15 more minutes? Or do you need to end when we were supposed to end at 2:30? Can't hear you. I don't know what's going on, but I still can't hear you.
Hello?
Yeah, now I can. Okay.
You are the leader of this bus. I
Okay.
follow your direction. I've got to go in a little while, but
well, it's Sunday. We don't want to keep you too much longer. But there are some good questions. And because you are from the Caribbean coast, I felt that this is a very important question. What was the impact of this neoliberal period on the Caribbean coast?
we in the Caribbean, we say a lot that when we lost the elections in 1990, yes, the Sandinista lost elections, we lost the person, but we also lost the opportunity to really build our autonomous process in a good way. Because what happened then is what the neoliberals did with the autonomous process is they decided, because they didn't have enough votes, to eliminate the special autonomous laws. But what they decided is to take it over from within. Now that's a way of saying, keep the law, but pervert it from within. And they aligned with a lot of very devious actors to try to make the autonomous process irrelevant for the development of our peoples. Now, what is the autonomous process for us? These are two sectors of the country that reached at a point in history where one half of the country, geographically speaking, and about, say, 20, whatever, how you want to count it, percent of the population, you look at it demographically, did not participate in the economic and political life of the country. It's exclusion. And what the autonomous law intended to do and did was to include indigenous Afro-descendant population, excluded population in the national development process. So the autonomous law was an effort to ensure that that sector of the society did not continue staying in behind the rest of the country. So it's sort of a inclusion effort. Then you have to recognize that in what, 100 years, 150 years, I don't know, however you want to count it, of existence of Nicaragua, the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua was completely excluded from investment, from government, from the state, completely. So it was only a big warehouse of natural resources that was extracted and in a sort of a laissez-faire with U.S. companies or foreign companies. So what we were building at the end of the 80s after the new constitution and the autonomous law was a formal process that would allow for the inclusion. You see, I don't say integration, because integration means erasing cultures and histories. Inclusion means recognizing culture and history. And that's what the autonomous process was doing by creating this autonomous governments, etc., facilitating that we could sit around the table and decide on policies that had to do with our own well-being. Until then, we were completely excluded. And that exclusion then meant that economic, social indicators on the Caribbean coast was the worst in the country, right? Wherever you want to cut it. Health, education, participation, all those elements were excluded. So this is a process that should have, in the elections of 1990, which was the first regional autonomous elections, was supposed to be the kickoff of the regional autonomy, with all of the economic development and social participation, all of the elements included. And what happened is, as we lost the election in 1990, we lost that process. So elements that had to do with the recognition of land, the titling of land, education in our native languages, health that recognized our historical ways of looking at health, all of those elements. But the fundamental part is retaking our leadership from the Caribbean coast of our regional development. After in 2007, then we were able to build that experience into the regional development plan, which is what then you can see today, 25 years later, how that impacted positively in what we have on the coast. me say, there were no highways to the Caribbean coast. The country was forced to stick back to back. I mean, so we were looking towards the Caribbean, the rest of the country was looking toward the Pacific. So all of that exclusion also expresses itself in political exclusion. It meant that it was enormously difficult for our people and bombarded by these modernizations element. We were losing culture, we were losing language, we were losing enormous amount of things. So the main, that's why I want to describe what we had before saying what we lost. So we lost the opportunity to really make that inclusion process happen in 1990 when we lost the elections. So we also lost the election. Sandinista lost the election. Many of us lost our jobs, whatever, how we want. But from the Caribbean coast, we lost the opportunity to build a process of inclusion and dignified recognition of our history and our culture into the national process. That's what we lost by in this neoliberal period. And what we have done today since 2007 and now 2025 is, I would say it's night to day. No? We have all these roads, we have all the materiality of existence, but also from the political perspective is the inclusion and the participation of Caribbean women and men in the national development process, in the national political process, magistrates in the Supreme Court, members of parliament, members of the national cabinet. All of those elements did not, I mean, so we could not dream of them before 2007, or we could not dream of them if it wasn't for the historical program of the Sandinista Front. And I come back to that because in 1969, the historical program of the Sandinista Front said that the recognition and inclusion of the rights of our people on the Caribbean coast was one of the Sandinistas' main directions or objectives that it said in that program. So all we are doing is implementing that historical program. So that's what we lost. We lost 16 years of the opportunity. And again, the neoliberal corruption of the minds and the economy was terrible. And for us on the Caribbean coast, because it distorted those elements of the autonomous process. We had to rebuild after 2007, not only the law or the letter of the law, but the intent. I mean, the ideological conceptualization around what we were doing with autonomy. I know you say we only had 3 minutes. I'm sorry, that's why I smiled at the beginning. This is
very good. Petros?
Yes, hello.
Do you have a question you'd like to pose from the list?
Let me just take a look. I like this one just probably selfishly. This is from Jose Dominguez. What books or material would you recommend to Nicaraguans from the diaspora who want to do away with the propaganda and learn more about Nicaragua?
Books. I think one of the things that we have is we probably need to talk more of what we're doing and how we're doing it. But I would, from a more informative perspective, I think El 19 makes a good, I don't know if they still have Barricada in English now. Barricada in English still exists?
I don't think so.
I don't know. But I know El 19 would be that academic works. I don't have anything right now in mind to tell you more than looking at those more informative proposal. But it's a very good question on how we need to systematize more what we're doing and how we're doing it, and so that people from outside can access much more systematized information about it. But yes, that one I would have to defer to a little bit further ahead, and maybe I can find some things and share with you, so you can share it with people.
I think this will need to be the last question. Please tell us why the neoliberals were unable to cut out the Sandinistas, and she puts it, cut out the Sandinista front operatives from the government entirely in 1990. And how did that help the Sandinista organizing during the 16-year period? It's kind of a vague question, but I'm sure you can do something with that.
Let me see how I navigate around that question, because there's an interesting word there, operatives. I don't know exactly what that means. What we did was to use the framework of what we had institutionally to defend what we call the conquest of the revolution. No? So whenever laws were going to pass, our privatizations were going to happen, we would rally around and try to stop them. No? But also, you have to see that in the National Assembly, although we had 38 members of parliament out of 90, I think then it was still only 90, 38 out of 90, the popular movement only stayed with 8 when all of the whole breaking and divisions ended happening, and with Commander Daniel at the head of that very small parliamentary group then of the Sandinista Front. But I think our capacity to mobilize the people is the single most important element. It's not the institutional frame or the assembly or places in the other powers of the state, but it is our capacity to mobilize people consistently. And there you had the FNT, the Workers' National Front. That was, I think, the fundamental political instrument force that we had in order to bring some order to the neoliberal proposal. No, we would mobilize and we would go. And the Sandinista, of course, is a very motivated and active force. Say, in that moment, you probably you don't have a number of people, but you have very motivated and mobilized. So we were able to move what we had to move to stop these efforts. But this is something that this whole topic that we're discussing today is something that I would say requires a very deep analysis and systematization. The other element of that period is the whole element of pacification of the country, which we didn't touch today. No, we were coming from a war that probably a quarter of the population was in arms the day before the elections.
Wow.
I'm talking the military forces, I'm talking the self-defense cooperatives, I'm talking the militias, I'm talking those who were attacking us, I'm talking, if you put them together, you would find a very high percentage of the population in arms. No, I said a quarter of the population. No, I think that's a little bit exaggerated. But well, 250 to 500,000 people is nearly 3 million, a quarter of it. No, but a very high percentage of the population was at some point in arms on the 24th of February of 1990. So then how that process after the elections, after we losing the elections, we were able so swiftly to demobilize and to pacify the country. Remember, we went through all of those processes, the recontra, the revueltos, and all of that whole thing. But this is a country that went from a war of intervention, obligating the society to organize itself. Everybody was walking around with a gun and in a span and that had to do a lot with the Sandinista capacity of organizing. We could easily take that, and I think Comandante said that in an interview, something around that lines. We could easily take over the government because of the mobilizational capacity of the Sandinista front. But we were a very responsible political force, and we did what we had to do, and we were patient enough. Although our people were suffering, we had to work with them, and we had to defend our people from the scourges of privatization and of inexistence of the state response to reach the 2007 in the way we reached the 2007, which promulgating reconciliation as a fundamental political proposal. I think this is, we could discuss the whole night, but
Yes,
I'd leave it here.
we could. Thank you so very much. I know that if people could clap for you here, they would. We hope to get to hear from you again soon. And we hope you get to relax a little today. We're very glad, very proud that you are the co-foreign minister of Nicaragua. That's so important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank everyone who endured through this conversation. Really, thank you. But these kind of conversations are very, from one, they're very important, but they also tells you a lot about where people are thinking and how people are thinking. And I hope I have given you maybe one or two little ideas that can help your work in defense of the popular movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And everyone, you will be getting an email about this class in September. So no worries. And good night. Goodbye. See you soon.